Welcome to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. This is a podcast dedicated to educating and empowering women from preconception, pregnancy, birth, and through early motherhood on wellness lifestyle. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton. I'm a maternity pediatric chiropractor, a functional medicine practitioner, and mother who has hand-selected experts in natural holistic healthcare specialties to shine light on options and choices during this exciting phase of a woman's life. Today's episode is entitled Your Health, Your Choice, Understanding Risk, Drug Interactions, and the Importance of Informed Consent with my special guest, Alexandra. Alexandra is the founder of Just the Inserts, a platform dedicated to empowering individuals with accessible, transparent information about medical choices. With a solid research background and a passion for informed consent, she guides people through the complexities of pharmaceutical products and decisions. Her commitment to clear, reliable information has earned her recognition as a trusted voice in the community, helping countless individuals make more informed, confident healthcare decisions. And you can find out more at justtheinserts.com.
Hi, Alexandra. Welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So today's going to be, I think, a juicy topic, something that I haven't really delved super deep into on Well-Adjusted Mama, but I think it's really important for all the parents out there listening, especially the moms, but especially the pregnant moms, the first-time pregnant moms. So we're going to be talking about understanding risk, drug interactions, and the importance of informed consent. So it's really diving deep into the medical world, and for all the parents out there that are lay people, understanding how to really advocate for yourself and for your child in that realm that can be certainly overwhelming and confusing if you don't know the terminology, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So I want to have you just start off with telling a little bit about your story and how you became so passionate about really educating parents about informed consent.
Yeah, well, so I kind of say that Just the Insert started from the cry of a mother. I was pregnant with my first child. I now have 3 young children, 5, 3, and 1. And when I was pregnant with my first, I just was researching everything, anything and everything that you can think of. I wanted to know about it. I read all the books, read all the articles, was just on every single blog site that you could possibly think of. And I really burned myself out. So by the time that I got to my 3rd trimester, I just could not consume any more information. I totally went, 2 feet in, jumped into the deep end. And looking in hindsight, I probably should have taken a little bit more methodical stance to it there, because there's everything that you can research. So many different things can go wrong and so many things can go right. And so I just wanted to be as informed as possible. But when I got into my 3rd trimester, my midwife, I remember sitting in my midwife appointment and she handed me a 1-page sheet on the Tdap vaccine. And that's the vaccine to prevent tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. And the thought is that the pregnant woman gets it for that pertussis piece, which is whooping cough. And the thought is that it's supposed to develop antibodies in the pregnant woman, and then it's passed on to the baby. And so I remember thinking at the time, this is very odd. I can't have some other medications. I can't have raw fish. I can't have raw cheese. I've told all these things that I can't have. It just didn't make sense that I could also have an injection that was okay.
She was recommending it to you as a 3rd trimester pregnant woman, not for your future baby. Right. And this is a midwife office, not an OBGYN office. So that's actually somewhat unusual. I'm assuming you were planning a hospital birth?
Yes. So it was a birth center attached to a hospital.
Okay.
And it should have been a red flag for me, but about 2 or 3 weeks before I was due, 80% of the midwife staff quit. And that should have been like a clear indicator that there was definitely some struggle between the hospital and between the midwife unit with the birthing center. And looking back, it definitely, I don't think you could classify it as a birthing center, a typical birthing center. It was basically a hospital birth.
I see.
But again, when you're a brand new mom, there's all the buzzwords. I mean, I remember doing the hospital tour and they showed us like all the essential oils that they diffuse. They showed us the labor tub that you can labor in.
And not birth in.
Right, not birth in. And then they had the light dimmers. And so for me, as a very natural-minded person, it was great. And being a first-time mom, I was thinking, well, in case something goes wrong, I want to be there. And it's funny, my last 2, I had a home birth. So hindsight is always 2020, right?
Always 2020.
But I remember getting this one-page sheet from my midwife about the Tdap vaccine, and she just handed it to me. There was no discussion. There was no, like, if you have any questions, let me know. It was just, hey, this is what you're getting at your next appointment.
Oh, it wasn't even like, this is what I'm recommending. She was just like, this is what you're getting.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was very like nonchalant and not a big deal. And so I thought, I need to research this a little bit more. But I had already been so overwhelmed by research. So I asked my mom, who was living across the country at the time, to research it for me. Oh. And she called me back a few days later, and her voice sounded as if I was standing on the edge of a cliff getting ready to jump off. She had such a sense of urgency in her voice, such a sense of seriousness, and just the information that she was sharing with me, I could not process it. My brain shut off. My emotions went absolutely haywire. I could not understand and comprehend the information she was providing to me. And so I went on social media and I typed in vaccine, and this was 2019. So this was before it kind of like got a little
pandemic,
bit
right?
Crazy and, very, very hostile. But at that time, it was still pretty bad to have that kind of conversation, because it was either you were 100% anti or you were 100% pro, and there was no conversation. It was just like shouting into a void, and a lot of logical fallacies, a lot of fear-based discussion on both sides of the argument. And so I just thought, okay, fine, I'm going to go, because I'm a military veteran, I'm going to go to the government resources, because at the time I thought vaccines were a government product. I didn't realize that there was a private pharmaceutical arm to it. And so I said, I'm just going to go to the government websites and read about them, because I know from my time in the military that every product on the market has to have some kind of manufacturer pamphlet or guidance or something like that. And so I ended up finding the manufacturer inserts, and I taught myself through CDC FDA trainings to learn how to read them and learn how to interpret them. And I was floored by what I found.
Tell me about those trainings, FDA, CDC trainings. Was that something online that you had discovered?
Yes, and it's very, very hard to find. So I have a free training course on my website where I link everything.
Got it.
So my free training course, and it's very dry and it's very hard to get through. It took me a very long time to weed through everything, because it's not, it's meant for like scientists and infectious disease people and like CDC headquarters and stuff like that. But it's publicly available. You can all find it.
Right. But so for the easier version, people can go to justtheinserts.com and you have that easier training for the layperson.
Right. Yes. And it's fed through that training, and it's all cited. So everything that you're getting is not opinion. Mm-hmm. It's not my interpretation. That's what the .gov resources say. It's just, I make it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, a little bit more digestible for the layperson to comprehend. Okay, I'm looking into the contraindication section. What does that mean? I'm looking into the warning and precautions section. What does that mean? Okay, I'm reading the adverse reactions section. Is this preclinical? Is this clinical? Are these adverse reactions that were after the product came to market? So that's post-marketing surveillance. So I break down all of those terms. If you just got very overwhelmed listening to that, I break down what each of those terms are. And then so when you're in that section, you can understand, okay, a contraindication is a medical condition known to increase my risk to an adverse reaction. So if I have a medical condition in this contraindication section, the manufacturer and the government is communicating to me that I'm going to have an increased risk for an adverse reaction. And that's important to know, whether you're talking about a prescription pharmaceutical, over-the-counter, vaccine, biologic. This is all information as a consumer that we need to be aware of as patients and parents in order to make those informed medical decisions.
100%. Wow, what an amazing, valuable service. Because, even for me as a healthcare practitioner, I don't really like reading those inserts. And luckily, I don't have a lot of those around my house because we, avoid pharmaceuticals whenever possible. But, if you do need a pharmaceutical, you want to know how to read that insert. And if you're deciding about pharmaceuticals, which includes vaccines, like you're mentioning, this is such an important topic for pregnant parents, because really you want to know this information before the baby is born. I do find that unfortunately a lot of times babies are born, new parents are overwhelmed even before they leave the hospital with vitamin K and Hep B, right? And all these recommendations. And they don't know, and they're not really necessarily getting, especially in that position, they're not even in a pediatrician's office, right? They're not getting the informed consent. So they're just like, well, this is what everyone's doing, so this is what I'm going to do. And then after the fact, they might wish they had made a different choice, right? So that's why this information is so important. I mean, I even think, preconception is a great time to start researching because, as you mentioned, during pregnancy can be overwhelming because you're not just researching, after the birth and baby care, you're researching all the pregnancy and birth stuff, right? There's so much to learn if it's your first time or even second time around. So yeah, so important.
I completely agree. And I say the same thing. I recently just spoke at a college and some of the young women were asking when the good time is to find a pediatrician or to find a healthcare provider or midwife or anything. And I said, do it before you're pregnant. If you can find a good team before you're pregnant, that is such a mental, emotional relief that you build that team beforehand that's going to support you no matter what you go through. And then you don't have that ticking time bomb of thinking, okay, I only have this a certain amount of time, so maybe I'm going to lax on some of my standards that I would normally have for a healthcare team or a healthcare provider because I'm, 6 months pregnant or whatever it might be. And I do say too, like you can change, in my opinion, you can change your provider whenever you need to if you can find another one that's going to serve you better. Because when you get into that birth space, when we're talking about labor progression and pain suppression, it's so dependent upon our hormones. And if we don't feel safe, we don't feel comfortable, that's going to inhibit our body's natural ability to suppress that pain and to naturally progress that labor. And that's where you get a lot more of those interventions because your body just can't relax and you can't progress.
Yeah, the nervous system has to feel safe. And so I agree. If you can set yourself for, and ideally the entire pregnancy, right? You're feeling safe, supported, loved, cared for, and minimal stress, right? That's the healthiest pregnancy you can create. And that will then create an empowered birth experience. So going into birth with fear is going to keep that cervix shut down. It's going to create that stalling, delays, certainly, like you said, more pain and a need for interventions. And then the interventions lead to more interventions and then potential cesarean, right?
Right. And I didn't really understand that my first pregnancy. The more times you're pregnant, the better you kind of understand your body a little bit more. And I was talking with someone, I was pregnant with my third and I was writing my book. And I was talking with someone there said, well, I really want to try to avoid Pitocin. Last time I had some hypersensitivity reactions. And so I really want to try to avoid it. What are some of your recommendations for alternatives? And I have some, like if you go onto my website, I have all these different pharmaceutical deep dives that I've done with all the different inserts. And then if you scroll all the way to the bottom, I have alternative recommendations. So if you don't want to, for whatever reason, you don't want to accept that pharmaceutical, there are other options. You're not just up a creek without a paddle. There are so many other tools that are available to you.
So many. And the challenge with that is you're not going to get that from an allopathic provider. So, if you come to somebody like myself, a chiropractor, I can talk about things to do to help naturally induce labor. And, I have the acupuncturist down the hall from my office and, we all work together and, and there's so many things that are possible. But the other thing too is that mental state of that woman. If she is so afraid about birth, then that also could delay the natural labor progression to start, right? Yep. And if there's also a lot of fear around going past the estimated due date, which is actually an estimate and not a hard deadline, then that creates fear and that creates stress. So these things all really impact our mental, emotional state. And that is a huge part of the birth process. And then also that empowered motherhood on the other side, right? Now, when we've had that empowered birth and we feel so powerful and someone comes, and said, hey, I want to inject this into our baby. We're like, tiger mamas. And we're like, well, let me think about this as opposed to like, I just got my ass kicked in birth and I'm traumatized and I don't have anything left to give regarding any more decisions. Right. And ideally, that's also where then a partner maybe can step in and help. Right. Because this is also not just a mom's decision, what we're talking about, especially regarding the child. Right. This is both parents. So do you have any advice for parents where the parents are not on the same page regarding some of these interventions for their child and are really at a, deadlock about this? And it's hard when it's not your own body, but it's your child's body, right? And you're in charge of that.
That is such a good question and something I get asked pretty much daily on, because there are so many different people that will start their research independently and not really communicate that to the child's other parent. And then I kind of give the example of when you start researching, you start at fact A and then you go to fact B and C and D all the way to Z. And sometimes when you get to like fact P, you bring it to your partner and it completely overwhelms them because they missed out on the building foundational research, data points that you got through to get to that point. And so it can kind of shut down their brain. And I think that's what happened to me when my mom was sharing that information with me. She started way further down her research and it overwhelmed me and my emotions kicked in and I couldn't adequately process that information. So my first advice would be, if you are newly pregnant or you're pregnant and you're trying to, or even if your child's a few years old, you still have time to research this. There's the CDC schedule goes up until 18 years, so you can research it at any point. But my advice would be is to sit down with that child's other parent and say, this is something that is really important to me. I want to make a more informed decision going forward on what is best for our child. Will you partner with me in that? Will you help me research? And I have an exercise in my free training course called Root of Fear. And it's basically taking all your fears and writing them down. Are you fearing a disease, or are you fearing judgment of a pediatrician? Or are you fearing judgment from society? Or maybe you're fearing judgment from your government because you have to go through a mandate or exemption process. Write down those fears and then categorize them, because your fear of a disease is going to be different than a fear of upsetting your provider. Those are two different things. And
or social media, like you said, kind of backlash, feeling like an outsider.
Exactly.
That's a very strong fear, like being outside of the norm, cultural norm, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about when parents are learning this information and making a choice that's not at this point mainstream in the United States. It takes a lot of courage to make a different choice and not really follow the sheep.
Yeah, absolutely. And so identifying what that root of fear is will help you figure out what you need to research, or maybe some mental barriers that you need to put up. I mean, I've talked with a few people where their pediatrician is their in-law or a family member. And I say, okay, so necessarily the answer to your solution might be you need to put up some boundaries within your family unit. And maybe there's a different answer for whatever that situation is. So first, understanding what are your fears and what are the kind of research to-do lists that you need for your own personal situation with your partner. And then the other thing is, understand how they learn. So some people are like me, where I need to go dive into the research. I need to get elbow deep into all of the information and all the text heavy, and I need to read and I need to process and I need to take that time by myself to understand it. Whereas other people, they learn auditory wise. They need a podcast that they need to listen to, or maybe people like a documentary that they want to watch, and it's a little bit more tangible for them to actually see how vaccines are brought to market and maybe how there are some external pressures within the federal and then state and then clinician level of potential financial conflicts of interest. Maybe that's what they need. And so understanding how they learn and then presenting it to them saying, I watched this or I heard about this. I would love your thoughts on that. And that communicates that, one, it's important to you, and then two, that you value whatever their thoughts are on that matter. And hopefully that'll soften the conversation to where it can be more productive and not as polarizing, because everybody's going to bring in their own preconceived notions based on whatever they've been exposed to in the culture. And so coming together and kind of having that mutual understanding that you just want to make the best decision for your family, I think you're going to go a lot farther, in my opinion.
I want to tell my well-adjusted listeners about my personal experience with Cozy Earth's bamboo sheets. They're temperature regulating, guaranteed to give you a comfortable night's sleep. They're made from viscose from bamboo, and they naturally wick away heat and moisture from your body, helping you sleep several degrees cooler. And I will tell you, on these hot summer months, it's so nice to have cooling, sweat-wicking sheets. My husband and I both love them. And I also got him some loungewear for men from Cozy Earth that are also made from viscose from bamboo, and he wears them every single night. So that speaks volumes. He doesn't typically wear anything every night. So if you want to check out their sheets, there's a 100-night sleep trial. You can try them during the hottest nights of the year, and if you're not in love, you can return them hassle-free. And there's also a 10-year warranty on all their bedding products. So check out their website at cozyearth.com and make sure you to use the code WHAM, that's WAM, for 40% off the best-selling temperature-regulating sheets, apparel, and more. Sit cooler, lounge lighter, stay cozy.
100%. Like, I can share my personal story. When I was dating and looking for my husband and father of my future child, I was interviewing them about their stance around home birth and vaccines and things that were really important to me. I already knew what I wanted for my pregnancy, birth, and child, probably from my chiropractic school training years before I got married and had a child. But I had to make sure my partner was on the same page. And I definitely had dated guys that were not on the same page. And so those relationships ended quickly. And then when I met my now husband, I told him about this new movie that was coming out called Vaxxed. This is in 2016, and it was playing in Tribeca at a movie theater. And so I said, I really want to go to this, and we lived right across the river from the city at the time. So I was like, let's go. So he was like, okay, I'll go watch it. And so we went there and we went out for dinner. And that night, and so after he saw that movie, I had talked to him about vaccines before that, but after he saw that movie, he's like, oh my God, I would never vaccinate my child. You know what I mean? It was just like such a clear answer for him. And so he went into it open, but still not really having all the information. And that was such an easy way to get him that information. If I had said, hey, read these books or whatever, honestly, those books would still be sitting on his nightstand. So that was an easy way to do it. And that night he proposed. Oh. So, it was really like, I felt good going into that proposal and marriage because I really felt like we were a team around creating a family and the health standards were aligned, right? Mm-hmm. So that's important. And I do speak to young women that I meet at different like functional medicine conferences and such, and they're very, natural aligned. And then they're talking about like, oh yeah, my boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, listen, that's a red flag right there. If you guys are already about your own bodies, you're in disagreement about how you care for your bodies, then how would you come together with caring for a future child, right? So as much as you might think this is a great guy, unless he's open to changing his philosophy on health, this is probably going to be a nightmare down the road, right? Because it is really different. It's like, okay, it's his body. He can do whatever he wants with it. But if you're really, interviewing him to be the other parent, right, then those things are important.
Absolutely. I am constantly communicating to my husband how grateful I am that he was willing to have the conversations with me. It's funny that you say that because I would share little bits of the research that I was researching. And it wasn't until we saw 1986, which was produced by the same, I believe, producer for Vax. And I remember him sitting there and he had heard little tidbits of things that I had said, like, I can't believe this. Can you believe this? And then he was sitting and watching it and he was like, I can't actually believe this is legal. I can't actually believe that this is real, but to see it all laid out in one film.
In a documentary,
After fact, he said it was like no turning back after that. And so I truly appreciate, because we went and saw it in theater, and that is just one of those moments where it's undeniable after you see it all laid out like that. And I do appreciate having those avenues. And that's why I definitely have my resources, but I have other resources linked in my free training course because I understand that this is just one aspect of
how to learn.
There are so many other options out there.
Documentaries are a great way. There's so many good ones out there. Now there's Vax 2. They just came out with a Vax 3. These are available to stream. And I would say, Vax was supposed to be in the Tribeca Film Festival and it got booted because it was so controversial. And we have to really ask, why are vaccines so controversial? It's so silly to me. It's like, why is a topic, any type of healthcare topic, does not need to be controversial, right? In my opinion, but yet it is. So I think that is food for thought for people anyways. Like, why is that the case?
Yeah.
And I would say, especially in this country, I don't think it's such a controversial topic in other parts of the world.
Definitely. And I think that's kind of a genesis of where people start to ask more questions because they realize, okay, why is this so polarizing? Why is this conspiratorial to ask about this medical product? Because it is a medical product. And then, like any product on the market, you should have the freedom to accept, delay, and decline them. And you should have the information that our own government knows about them. And so when there are people that advocate for me to be silenced or the information that I share to be removed from the internet, then it goes back to why?
Yeah, why?
This is information that's verified from our own government, and everything is cited, and it's credible, and it's true. Why is it so controversial? And that's, I think, actually has the opposite effect of those that are trying to silence it. I think it gets people digging deeper.
It does. I mean, that's the blessing that happened with Vax. The producers, the director were like, we would have never gotten this much exposure if there wasn't this big outcry to kick us out. And I don't even know if that had ever happened before. So in other words, it was like, why? Why is that movie? It was in and now it's out. And that people will get interested in, especially when we live in a country where we're supposed to have freedom of speech, right? And then it's like, wait, this feels like censorship, right? And even when you're talking about there's lots of websites on the internet that are not factual, and those aren't censored, right? They're out there because it's the internet and it's the United States, and we're supposed to have access to anything, right? And everything and everything. But I have a magnet on my fridge, quote from RFK Jr., that no time in history have the people that are censoring been the good guys, because that's the truth. Why? Like, even if it's something you don't agree with, censor it, right? People can have access to, and like I said, it's just censorship, I think, is a big deal here too. And when you create controversy and kind of make it difficult to have conversations and to share information, that is censorship, right? And that is definitely concerning when it comes to informed consent.
Absolutely, yeah. The definition of an informed consent is that you have all the information needed to make a well-considered decision. And so if I consistently say, we hear the term safe and effective, and we hear, oh, well, the benefits outweigh the risks. But if the risks are not communicated, the benefits will always outweigh them. And so it's kind of rigging the system. If you're not allowed to talk about the risks, even just the known risks, there's a whole bunch of unknown risks as well. But if you're not even allowed to talk about the known risks, then that's not informed consent. That's medical coercion, in my opinion. And that's when you start leading into a little bit medical bullying. And that's where people start digging into those financial conflicts of interest and start realizing that there's a lot of different things at play for that decision when we're talking about, the CDC ACIP, when we're talking about the regulatory bodies, and then we start looking at the insurance models and how some of those are structured. And I do touch on those aspects because I do get asked about it quite often. And I cite everything and just say, yeah, there are potential financial conflicts of interest. Maybe not for everyone. Maybe not every pediatrician is compensated for vaccines in their practice. It depends on how their business model is. It depends on their state. But it is something to be aware of. To be an informed consumer, you should know if there's that potential external pressure on your provider.
It's very sick. I mean, even, beyond like doctors, or hospitals, right, getting compensated for following certain guidelines, financial compensation, even the insurance companies want to see, let's say a pediatrician has a certain percentage of their patients vaccinated, right? And they're tracking all of that information. And if the doctor's number is slipping, their percentage is slipping below what they consider, I guess, an appropriate threshold, then they put a lot of pressure on that doctor about allowing them to be in their network, right? So even if you don't get paid, and that doctor's not getting paid to give a vaccine, if they're dependent on their in-network insurance patients to build their business, right? And, essentially pay for their expenses and their livelihood, right? This is their business, right? Their small business. And now the insurance company is bullying them to say, get more of those patients vaccinated, or they have to sign a waiver that you told them that this is essentially a bad decision, that they're not vaccinating their child. I'm like, what business is the insurance company? It's the insurance company. Yeah. They're not my healthcare provider.
This is crazy. I just learned this. So I'm working on a pro-informed consent provider directory because I was starting to realize that some people were accepting vaccines or other medical products solely because they were afraid that they weren't going to have access to healthcare. And so I wanted to create this provider directory of people to be able to go on and say, okay, all of these providers have opted in and said, yes, I will honor informed consent. So I have a team of a handful of women that contact all these providers. We've contacted thousands so far just in the last 6 months. And a few of them that I've talked to, they've said, yes, we honor informed consent. However, do not add us to the provider directory because you'll put a target on our back. And because our insurance system that they work in, whatever hospital network they work in order for that hospital to get reimbursed by Medicaid, this is what they tell me. Full disclosure, I've not been able to verify this through any sources. It's just what they told me. I can't find this on like the internet or anything like that. But they are not able to reimburse for Medicaid patients unless a certain amount of percentage of patients are vaccinated for whatever they're trying to push, whether it be RSV or flu or COVID or whatever it is.
Right.
So there's a huge incentive, even if it isn't just that individual provider in that hospital network, the hospital network as a whole has a huge financial incentive to make sure that whoever walks through those doors is vaccinated. And that's why when you might go into an ER visit or you might go into something to get an extra or something, you might be offered a vaccine. It's because it's on their checklist because they have to in order for them to be in that hospital network. It's on that checklist whenever they see a new patient to ask, for that.
Yeah, it's just a checklist thing. And you can't even, like those poor providers, like they're not even like the doctor, right? It's like the nurse coming in the room. After my husband had back surgery, I remember he was still drowsy from the anesthesia. And the nurse is like, oh, I see here you didn't get the COVID vaccine. Would you like it now? I was like, what the hell? Like, it's like, are you kidding me? But she was just checking a box, honestly, but it was like, she didn't know anything about his medical history, except that he had just gotten out of a back surgery. And you don't ask somebody who just got out of surgery with anesthesia to make a choice.
Oh my God, that just churns my stomach.
I know. I was like, this is crazy.
You were there to advocate for him. And that's why.
Yeah. I mean, he was able to say, no, thank you. And I just bit my lip, right? I was just like, oh my God. And I'm like, no, this isn't the person to yell at, right?
Right. They're just following and they're going to get penalized if they don't.
I know. If they don't follow the protocol, then they could lose their job, right? So that's kind of the world we're living in. So I think the reality is really understanding that we have to be the advocates for our family. And when there's tools like justtheinserts.com, this is a wonderful resource for us to become better advocates.
Yeah. And it's a skill. It's really just a skill to learn. And I tell so many people, take it now because you never know when you're going to be in that emergency situation. And I get so many messages from people frantically in the ER, whatever their situation they're in. And they're thinking, I got in a car accident. My spouse just had a cardiovascular event. They recommended this product. Have you done an insert on it? And my heart breaks a little bit because it's like, I wish you would have taken the training so then would know how to go to the FDA website, how to find that insert. So when you're sitting in that pharmacy line and you're sitting, in trying to make that rash decision, you can go find that insert and then you've already been trained on how to read each of those sections. So you can scroll to the section that you need to, because every single prescription pharmaceutical, every single vaccine, every single biologic has an insert on the FDA website. And I teach you exactly how to find and read it. So if you are in those situations, then you can at least get some informed consent. Maybe it's not the full breadth of, what we would be ideal, but at least you can get some of it. And I say this because there was a woman where her husband had a heart attack and they were in the ER and they recommended, I can't remember what product they recommended, but they recommended a product. She pulled up the insert, looked at one of the warning and precautions, and her husband had a medical history of one of the warnings. And she communicated that to the nurse and they said, oh, thank you for telling me. No, we don't want him to be on it. We'll give him something else.
Right.
And so it's so important to have that skill before you ever need it. So then you can make a little bit more informed decision no matter what it is.
Have you ever read an insert that you liked?
That's a really good question.
Because I haven't.
So I understand. I personally believe it's impossible to be unbiased. I've never claimed to be unbiased because I think everybody has a bias with your life experience, your training and everything like that. But when I sit down to do a new insert, I try to wipe my mind clean and think, okay, I'm going to just read what's on the insert, read what the government and the manufacturer is telling me, and then I'm going to report off of that. And then every single time I'm thinking, maybe this is the one, that it's not completely overwhelming. Like, I cannot believe this product is still on the market. And I haven't had that yet.
Oh, man. I was hoping you were going to tell me that you found something good.
No, I've done a few over the counters that maybe they're not too horrible, but still, like, some of them, Miralax is used off label for children. So it completely flabbergasted me when I read that it's not recommended for anyone under 17 years old. And then I'm like, wait, every single pediatrician on social media recommends Miralax. I have friends where their pediatrician recommended it daily for years for their child. And here the manufacturer saying it's not recommended for children. So there are definitely some inserts where I've read it, I'm just like, I cannot believe that this is on the market and that this is recommended for people that the manufacturer says should not be taking it.
Yeah, totally. Well, Alexandra, this was an amazing conversation. So much valuable information was shared. Do you have any last thoughts you want to share with the audience?
I would just say that informed consent is not a singular event. It's a process, and it's not a sprint. It's a marathon. So take your time. Try not to get too overwhelmed. While taking my free training course, feel free to come and go as you please. You don't have to provide an email or anything like that. I have audio options so you can listen if you need to, and just really take your time to dwell into each aspect of it. So then you can internalize that information and not feel pressured, because when you get into that pressured mindset, then you get into more fear-based decisions. And to be able to make those decisions with knowledge and confidence is my goal. And I think taking that time and creating that space is really important.
It's so important. Well, Alexandra, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's really informative conversation with Alexandra from Just the Inserts. She is so passionate about making sure individuals and especially parents are really well educated and informed around utilizing any pharmaceutical products with themselves and their children. And that really applies to like pregnant women, new moms, and especially young children, when there's a lot of opportunity for interventions that may or may not be helpful for your family. So it's really great to get more information and feel supported and empowered, so that when you're making a decision, it's not from a place of fear, it's from a place of informed consent. So check out Alexandra on socials, Instagram at Just the Inserts and Just the Alternatives. She's also on X at Just the Inserts. And then you can also find out more at her website, justtheinserts.com.